upstairs having breakfast, and I'm kind of in this like tunnel in the morning where I don't like see anything, everything's blurry until I have like a sufficient coffee and I focus. And then I saw this whole group of people get up and move, and I thought that was you. I think that was you guys, like going out to work, and I was like, oh, I'm totally not ready. Well, thank you for all of this marvelous attention. And again, any excuse to come to Banff anytime. I love it here. And not only last night was, I have an 18-month-old at home, and last night was only my second night away from her. So of course I woke up this morning, first thing I have to text my husband and make sure everything's okay, and she had a rough night, and she was looking for me, and I felt guilty for about 5 minutes. 5 solid minutes, and then, but I had my windows like open, like all the blinds open, and just woke up to this amazing fog, kind of burning off the mountains. And then I wrote some stuff, and all of these things I never get to do with an 18-month-old. So it was a great gift. So thank you. We are here to talk about the break. Now, I just want to double check time-wise. We're going until about 12?
11:45.
11:45. Okay, am I talking till 11:45 and then questions?
No.
Is that your idea?
Well, you can go till about 12, but that's all we have. We need to be over at lunch by about 12:15.
Okay. Whew. We're gonna totally do that. That is gonna be fun. So we're gonna have a really nice intense hour together. What I was thinking of doing is maybe kind of providing a reading just to get us into the space, which I always like to do to ground myself in this whole talking out loud in front of people and making articulate sentences kind of thing, which is good, generally. And then I'm sure, do we have questions? Like yesterday there was so many questions. And are we fine with questions? I love questions. I love getting interviewed. Some people don't like that. Some people just like to talk for an hour, and I get really tired of myself. And I go off on tangents anyway, kind of like this kind of shatter shoot, I don't know what that word. I cover a smattering of things in a really quick amount of time, and they don't seem to be connected that much. So questions are great, because then I can just go off on whatever tangent you choose, which is nice. So yeah, I'll start with a little reading. I'll start with the very first section here. I like reading this only because, like I said yesterday, I like reading Rain's parts in this book because she's the most poety, and I am most comfortable reading poetry. I love writing fiction, and I love being read to by fiction writers when they're on the stage. There's a certain cadence with how people go back and forth between dialogue and exposition, and I really like that. And I like reading like that too, but my home is in poetry, so I always like to come back. And Rain's parts are the poet parts that I put in. I also like reading this first section because it really situates the novel. And Rain's parts, just, trivia of the book, came in last. And they were really my indulgence that my editor, Janice Zernerbny, who's brilliant, works at HarperCollins now. She kind of let me play around with this. I really wanted an omniscient kind of floating sky woman kind of character to kind of round out the sections of the book and really bring a softness to a lot of the hardness. And then when they were done, I was very glad that she enjoyed them and thought they were a nice addition, because for me, I found them quite integral as soon as I made them. Which kind of happens to everything in the book. Once I wrote it, it needed to be there, and I became very passionate about it. And again, as I mentioned yesterday, I recently got a nose surgery done, so I'm drippy. And I'll just be very mindful of that later when we're shaking hands. I try to be conscious of that as possible. It's, humanity, hey? Human things. So I'll just read the first part here. The break is just a piece of land just west of McPhillips Street. A narrow field about 4 lots wide that interrupts all the closely knit houses on either side and cuts through every avenue from Selkirk to Leela. That whole edge of the north end. Some people call it nothing and likely don't think about it at all. I never called it anything, just knew it was there. But when she moved in next door, my Stella, she called it the break. If only in her head. No one had ever told her any other name, and for whatever reason, she thought she should name it something. Its hydroland was likely set aside in the days before anything was out there, when all that low land on the west side of the Red River was only tall grasses and rabbits, some bush in clusters, all the way to the lake in the north. The neighborhood rose up around it, houses built first for Eastern European immigrants who were pushed to that wrong side of the railroad tracks, kept away from the affluent city south. Someone once told me that the North End houses were all made cheap and big, but the lots were narrow and short. That was when you had to own a certain amount of land to vote, and all those lots were made just inches shorter. The tall metal hydro towers would have been built after that. Huge and gray, they stand on either side of the small piece of land, holding up 2 smooth silver cords high above the tallest house. The towers repeat every 2 blocks, over and over, going far into the north. They even might go as far as the lake. My Stella's little girl Maddie named them robots when the family first moved in beside them. Robots is a good name for them. They each have a square-like head and go out a bit at the bottom like someone standing to attention. And there's 2 arms overhead that hold the cords up to the sky. They are a frozen army standing guard, seeing everything. Houses built up and broken down around them. People flooding in and out. In the 60s, Indians started moving in. Once status Indians could leave reserves and many moved to the city. That was when the Europeans slowly started creeping out of the neighborhood like a man sneaking away from a woman in the dark. Now there are so many Indians here. Big families, good people, but also gangs, hookers, drugs, and all these big beautiful houses somehow sagging and tired like the old people who still live in them. The area around the break is slightly less poor than the rest, more working class, just enough to make the hard-working people who live there think they are out of the core and free of that drama. There are more cars in the driveways than you see on the other side of McPhillips. It's a good neighborhood, but you can still see it, if you know what to look for. You can still see the houses with never-opened bedsheet-covered windows. If you can still see the cars that come late at night, park right in the middle of the break, far away from any house, and stay only 10 minutes or so before driving away again. My Stella can see it. I taught her how to look and be aware all the time, and I don't know if that was right or wrong, but she's still alive, so there has to be some good in it. I've always loved the place my girl called the break. I used to walk through it in the summer. There's a path you can go along all the way to the edge of the city, and if you just look down at the grass, you might think you are in the country the whole way. Old people plant gardens there, big ones with tidy rows of corn and tomatoes, all nice and clean. You can't walk through it in the winter, though. No one clears away. In the winter, the break is just a lake of wind and white, a field of cold biting snow that blows up with the slightest gust. And when the snow touches those raw hydro wires, they make this intrusive buzzing sound. It's constant and just enough you can ignore it. Like a whisper, you know is a voice, but can't hear the words. And even though they are more than 3 stories high, when it snows, those wires feel close and low and buzz a sound that's not quite, almost like music, just not as smooth. You can ignore it. It's just white noise, and some people can ignore things like that. Some people hear it and just get used to it. It was snowing when it happened. The sky was pink and swollen, and the snow had finally started to fall. Even from inside her house, my Stella heard the buzzing as sure as her own breath. She knows to expect it when the sky fills with clouds, but like everything she's been through, she has just learned to live with it. really like that passage, not only because it requires no explaining and setup, but it introduces Stella, and I think it's also very gentle to Stella, and much of the book is not gentle to Stella. So of course her mom had to be. One of my friends who was one of the early readers of the book and early discussers of the contents said it felt like, she was also a North End resident, more recent in her adulthood, North End resident, and she said it felt like the North End was so much of a character in the book, like a 11th voice. And I really like that as a description of that idea of place. Even though it's funny because it is my interpretation of this place, and I wanted to be very deliberate in that this was only things that I had heard and my impressions of it, and that in no way is ever any of our one individual impressions can be like the go-to all end, end all definition of a place, especially a place. Place is always so different for everyone. So I did do quite a lot of deliberate things in describing that, that rumor that I had heard about the North End lots being smaller. It is true that back when voting was dependent on property size and rights, those lots were made, they were only considered like half lots. But that was then quickly overturned in about, just a matter of a few years. And then those homeowners were allowed to vote. And then eventually after that, you didn't need to buy a home to vote. It did take until the 1960s before any First Nations person could vote unless they had given up their status. But Métis people, once they no longer had to be homeowners, did get to vote. So I always like to clarify that, like this is not in any way the be-all end-all part of the story. I also paid close attention, and I didn't in the book anywhere refer to the name the North End or Winnipeg. Every time it was the North Side or North Side. And I never actually used the word Winnipeg, which wasn't a deliberate choice, but I did want to make sure it wasn't in capital letters, the North End, Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, because it's much more of a fluid place, and this is a fictional story. Though it is a real place, and I really did go up there. It's all complicated. And poety, that's the word of today.